Okay, so let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's workshop. My name is Ashif. I work at the Dean's Office in the Colin Powell School, and I help a little bit out with career and professional development. And this is the second workshop in the series of workshops that we're facilitating by our partners at JP Morgan Chase as part of their Advancing Black Pathways initiative. Today's session is on interviewing and networking skills, and then it's going to be hosted by Eddwina Bright, who's the VP Product Manager on the digital payments team at Chase. She focuses on building tech solutions for business and commercial banking customers. Before this role, she was part of the Management Associate Program at the firm, which is a 2-year post-MBA management training initiative. She completed several rotations across the firm. She worked on projects spanning from data aggregation, digital and fintech strategy, as well as consumer research for their UK-based consumer bank. She did her MBA at Columbia Business School. She graduated as a valedictorian for her class at Baltimore City Community College, where she served as the student rep on the board of trustees. And later on, she enrolled at Morgan State University and graduated with honors, earning a bachelor's degree in finance. So we're really excited to have her here today. Just a heads up, we are recording the event. So in case you miss anything from today's session, you can go ahead and check it out on our webpage or on YouTube. I'm going to post the link where our webpage is and how you can access the other links. So I'm going to go ahead and hand over the mic to Eddwina. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, when you read it, you make it sound so good. I'm like, oh, who's that person? Well, thank you for having me. And I want this to be really fun and interactive. So I appreciate you all joining the session. I love talking to students. I remember being in your shoes and, many. I'll get started. Okay, let me share my screen. All right. And as we get started, I need to click something in Zoom, don't I? Sorry about that. Share screen. All right. Thank you. Let's see. All right. And let me know if you can see that. All right, so there will be a few moments where I'll ask for thumbs up or ask people, for to answer questions. So definitely feel free to unmute, jump in, ask questions if you have comments. I think we have about an hour, and I have slides, but there's a lot that, I don't have in here. So if there's anything else that you want to discuss in the realm of interviews or networking, definitely let me know. And before we get too deep into things, I would like to understand from the group, are most people looking for post-graduation roles or internships? So if you give me a sense of that, I think I can better target speak up about what kind of opportunities they're looking for. That would be great. Okay, we have a shy group here. That's fine. There's also, I think there's a chat. Is there a chat sheet where we could?
Yeah, I think the answers are coming in the chat.
Oh, wonderful.
Grad and internships.
Okay, got it. All right. So if you don't mind keeping an eye on that,
sure.
As I ask questions, so I don't have to pop it up on the screen, that'd be great. All right. So, well, let's get started. So yes, I'm Eddwina Bright. So she's given my intro, and I'm very, very happy to be here with you today. In addition to my work at JP Morgan, I mentor students and help with, internships and career development. And even before business school, I was director at Sponsors for Educational Opportunity, which is a nonprofit that focuses on career development for minority students. So this is definitely my wheelhouse. Not to brag, but every interview I've gone on, I've received the opportunity. So I think you're in good hands here. We'll see, right? So like I said, very excited to be speaking with you guys, and let's get started. So interview skills, just by a show of like hands or one of the emojis, is there anyone who hasn't had an interview ever? I would like to know that just to get a sense of where you are in your career. All right, so I see one hand raised. Thank you. So when we think about an interview, it's really typically one-on-one conversation. It could be a group interview, which involves several people in a conversation to talk about your personal qualifications for typically a job or a role at a company. So that's kind of what we will be talking about. And this can involve an internship, as I mentioned earlier. It can involve a full-time role, or even kind of what we have as informational interviews. So I'll talk a little more about that when we get to the networking portion. But for this particular part, we'll talk only about when you're interviewing, kind of looking for a job. And the way I've structured this is we'll talk about kind of what you need to do before the interview, what you should do during the interview, and what you should do after the interview has concluded. All right, so before the interview, research. That's the name of the game. So it's really important that after you've applied and you've been notified that you do have an interview, it's great to immediately start researching, sorry. The interview is what you're going on. So it's important to start immediately researching. So you want to understand kind of things like, what industry is this company in, or this organization? Is it a nonprofit? Is it a government agency? Is it a Fortune 500 company? Those are the kinds of things that you want to understand just by nature of the industry. What industry is this company operating in? That will help you. One of the most important things that will help you with is just speaking the language. So understanding what industry this company operates in will have you better able to highlight and pepper your answers with words that reflect back that you've done this research. So that's something that's really important, and also helps to kind of further your own understanding of what the industry is and where you'll be working. The second part of that, the second kind of step in that, is researching the company. So if you're taking on an interview at a public company, you could look at their financial statements, you could look at their annual report, you could look at things like their letter to their investors. These are all elements that we produce at JP Morgan, and lots of other companies do as well. Even their website, you want to understand their voice, and you want to understand how they speak to the public. That's something that is also really important, because when you get in the interview, it's great to show that you have taken an interest in the company that you'd like to work in, and have done the research to really understand what they're about, understand what's important to them, and understand, kind of their performance or how they speak. Next, we really want to talk about understanding the role. So this really starts with the job description. So when you are applying, it's important that you, and sometimes I forget this, but you want to print out the job description or save it down so that it's a good document for you to reference further along in the process. And that's important because most times in the job description, there's a section that talks about the company, there's a section that talks about the team, then there's a section that talks about the requirements or duties of the role, right? So you want to have a really clear understanding of what the company and most importantly the hiring manager is asking for, and they're doing that through the job description. So that's a great way for you to, again, kind of pepper in elements from the job description. If they say they, for example, are looking for someone that has strong analytically, then maybe I should talk about this Excel project that I did, or I should talk about this data analysis project that I did. So that's something that is really good to highlight when you're thinking about preparing for the interview. And then lastly, in the interviewer. So I know that your last session you had, you guys talked about resumes and LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is a great place to start doing that research, because there are different kinds of interviewers. You have interviewers that could be recruiters for the company. There are interviewers that could be the actual hiring manager, so the manager or supervisor that you work for. And then there could be peer interviewers. So these are other people on the team that the hiring manager would like to get feedback from and so would ask you to interview with them. So it's important that if you, and sometimes this doesn't always happen, you may not always know, in advance who you're interviewing with, but you should know kind of maybe what the person's role is. So for example, if you're interviewing with a recruiter, that person is assessing you for the next step, right? Because most times they're not making the final decision. So they're assessing you to see if you are going to move on to the next step in the process. So the conversation may be a little more high level. You may not want to get in super deep into the weeds unless they ask about certain things, but that's why it's important to understand kind of who you're talking to, so you know what level of conversation to have. Whereas if you're interviewing with the hiring manager, it becomes a lot more important to focus on what you've accomplished, focus on those skills, and focus on kind of what you bring to the table and how you see yourself as being valuable to the team. And then lastly, when we're talking about those peer interviewers, it's really about cultural fit, right? Is this someone that you want to work with? Are you conveying that you're someone they want to work with? That's more so the level of conversation that you want to have. So it's important to try to understand who it is that you're interviewing with, and where they fit within the organization. I'll pause there. Any questions, comments? All right.
Wait,
Like I
I
said,
had a question.
oh yeah, sure.
So it just worked out really awkwardly, but I actually have an interview today.
Awesome, congratulations.
Yeah, so it worked out great. So I really wanted to ask you really quickly because I wasn't able, like our times weren't really matching up and they had to do it today and like at 1:30. So I thought this would be a great thing just to listen to you right before. But I wanted to ask you. So it's my third interview with the company and it's with HR now. Any advice?
So you've already interviewed with the hiring manager.
So I interviewed with the hiring manager and two people that work there. There was a group interview. The second interview was with a like an operations manager. And then now this interview is with someone from HR, but they switched it up on me because in my initial email, they told me it was one person from HR. And then in my Zoom link interview, they said it was someone else.
Okay, well, that shouldn't alarm you. Maybe the person's sick or out, or
Yeah,
something behind the scenes could have
I thought
happened.
it was just like the scheduling, but any advice when it comes to an HR interview?
So that's everything I said when I was talking about the recruiter interview. So the order is a little changed around for you, and sometimes that happens. But the good thing is that if you didn't pass the first interview, you wouldn't have made it to this point, right?
Yeah.
So you should take it as a really positive sign that they may potentially, be ready to talk to you about making an offer. Don't assume, we don't want to get too arrogant, but it's a great sign. I think you should ask questions more broadly around the company, maybe even about, what kind of career trajectory has the HR person seen with other people in this role? What have they seen people do that have been super successful in this role? What mistakes have they seen people make in this role? So it's really about understanding kind of their perspective on the role and, their interaction. And you want to go in with questions if you have questions around anything about from an HR perspective, whether it's, you obviously want to tread lightly, but if you have questions about salary or benefits or things like that, you could, this is an opportunity for you to ask.
Do you think I should ask that before they officially offer me the job?
Well, if you have the question, there's a way to do it. You can say,
I've
I'm
had
not
like
clear, is there any information you can share?
Yeah, that's what I just wasn't, because I haven't brought up any type of salary or any type of like stuff you ask when you have the job questions in my first. I haven't asked that at all. Everything is centered been like job wise, office space, what does the office like to do outside of work, like things like that, and everything's been answered really well. I just right now my only other type of questions would be like kind of I have to see how the conversation goes if they're going to offer to me today, but like health benefits and how does probation period work, for how long is I have to reassure that this job is a full-time offer. But like I go on Indeed and LinkedIn and all these questions are kind of asked. So do you think it's okay to re-ask the questions even though you can basically find the answers online?
Well, I think it's okay for at this point for you to say, I have questions about some of the more tactical elements of the role, i.e. salary, benefits, the probationary period. Is this a good time for us to discuss that, or should we wait? So that's how you should frame it. And yeah, it's always good to still discuss it because the information from Indeed, you never know if it's dated or if things have changed. We're in a new virtual world. A lot of that information was captured when we weren't in such a virtual world. So, you definitely still want to confirm what you see online. And also maybe not lead with what you've seen online. That's more of a for you in the back of the
Yeah,
mind. So, but I think, before we move on, just in the conversation, you could just frame it as, I have some of these more tactical questions. Is this a good time for us to talk
that's
about
a
it? And
great phrase.
they'll know, you'll know by the way they engage the conversation if it's,
Yeah.
you know.
I just wanted to say thank you. I have to like run now, but I just want to say thank you. Thank you, Chief, too. You planned this out perfectly. I I literally
Good
got this
luck.
right before my interview. You gave me some great phrases and great pointers on how to bring it up. I'll let everyone know how it goes. And this mentorship has been a great, and it's been a big part of why I was able to get this and actually get to my third interview. So thank you so much, everyone. And I'll just let you guys know. I'll let you guys know how it goes. Thanks, Chief, for everything.
Good luck, man.
And thank you guys. Thank you, Bridget. Thank Bright. Thank you, Antonio. Thank everyone.
All right, man.
Good luck. Okay,
Thank
I
you.
love the in real time feedback. Any other questions, comments? All right. Next thing I want to talk about before the interview is it's really important to master your elevator pitch as well as your story. And what I mean by that, so your elevator pitch, well, actually, let's see, raise your hand if you know what an elevator pitch is. I hear some pings. I'm not sure if those are hands. Okay, yay, great. Okay, so if you're raising your hand. So for those of you who may not have raised your hand, an elevator pitch is a 30 to 45-second introduction. Essentially, the idea is that if you were stuck in an elevator with the CEO of a company, kind of what would you, or any, person of authority or that you'd like to meet, what would you say to them? And so it's great to have, your intro, who you are, where you're from, why do you find yourself in that position? It could be a job fair, it could be a networking event. If it's the interview, why you applied, things like that. So you definitely want to have a handle on that particular introduction because you want to be confident and come across as in command of yourself and in command of the situation. And what I mean by your story is typically a lot of times interviews open with, tell me about yourself or walk me through your resume. So that's something that should come very naturally to you. And that's something that if you practice and you have a good handle on it, it helps you start the interview in command and feeling confident because it's information that you know, right? So no one can kind of tell you otherwise when it comes to your story. So you want to be sure that you're saying, everything that is important up front. You're leading with that. When it comes to your resume, what's your major? What school do you go to? What did you do last summer? What did you do during the school year? Maybe you had an in-school year internship? Maybe you had a great study project. You don't want to get too deep into the weeds because you want to allow yourself space to talk more in depth about some of those elements of your resume. But the method that I've seen work really well is going kind of like top down of your resume. So, your name, where you're from, what your major is, what you're studying in school. Then you can talk about any, experience that you've had. Last summer I worked at XYZ, but this summer I'm really hoping to get experience in ABC, right? And my extracurricular activities consist of skating and, axe throwing. I don't know, I'm making that up. But that's a good way to just frame who you are as well as your experience at the onset of the conversation. And that's something you can practice. And that's something, and we'll talk about practice, but that's something you should practice and really have a good command on. And one thing I want to highlight here is that memorization is not the goal. So you don't want to come across as robotic or kind of rote because the whole key of an interview is to really try to connect with a person, right? To connect with them on an individual level and convey that you're qualified and that you're a great candidate. And so if it seems like you're memorizing and just kind of regurgitating information, it doesn't allow the vulnerability to come in. So you really want to just highlight, maybe there are 3 to 5 things. I'm definitely a list person, so you'll see a lot of this in the tips. But are there 3 to 5 things that you want to always ensure that someone knows about you? So my 3 to 5 things are, I'm from Baltimore. I went to community college. It's not something that people would assume about me. I love that about myself. And it's something that's really important to me that, people know. I have 2 daughters. What else? I also love to travel. And professionally, I've worked in nonprofit, I've been an entrepreneur, I've worked in finance. So these are some of the things that I always try to include in my elevator pitch. And so if you just know what they are, it gives you kind of a framework of what to say when the interview kind of begins. And that's the work you should do before you get into the room. Any questions? Anyone want to give us their elevator pitch for a quick practice? Okay, I'll let you off the hook this time. All right, so let's move on. All right, so let's talk about that practice. Practice before the interview season, session, or appointment starts. One thing that you can do is to have mock interviews. So send one of your friends the job description and your resume and have them ask you a few questions and give you feedback. This is a great way for you to practice, in a low stakes environment with someone that you feel comfortable with, someone that you trust that can give you great feedback. This is kind of a great way to just practice that muscle. And it's something that a lot of times we forget to do. But this is something I always do. I always, either have my husband, give me a mock interview, or one of my friends, and say, okay, these are the things I think the hiring manager or whomever's interviewing me would care about. So make sure you ask me about this. Or, I think my answer about my weaknesses is a little weak. So let's practice that. I'm going to tell you my answer, and then you help me figure it out. So mock interviews are a great way for you to practice and ensure that you're conveying that story, practice your elevator pitch, and get the real, live in-time feedback. Another great way is to record yourself. So this may feel awkward at first, but set up your phone, record yourself, and watch it, a couple times, because it'll help you to understand your tics, your body movements. It'll help you to understand, the thing you do with your nose that looks kind of weird. You really want to see how other people view you. And that's been something that's been really valuable for me, for sure. And even I didn't get too much into kind of like the way you should dress or presentation or anything like that, but we can talk about that at the end, for sure. But a lot of times it can feel awkward if it's just a one-on-one conversation and the person's eyes are laser beamed into you and you want to look away, but you feel like you can't, right? So recording really helps with that. One of my tricks is kind of, I look at the corner, or I look at the top of their head, or look down for a minute to pause and gather my thoughts. So if you record yourself, you'll see how you can add some of those strategies in a more organic fashion. And that's something that you can do alone, you can do on the run, and you'll really understand how you look and how you are presenting. And then the last thing is, and we'll talk more about this in a few slides, but one thing that I really would like to convey that you should do before the interview is to finalize 3 to 4 key stories from your experience. They could be academic experiences, extracurricular, I don't know why I can't say that today, or work experiences. And they should be pretty distinct in terms of what the stories convey. I think that'll make more sense when we get a little further down. But for right now, think about just what are 3 kind of professional stories that I have from my background, whether they're work related, extracurricular related, or academic related, that I can use in an interview. We're going to pause there. And like I said, I'll talk more about it once we talk about getting to the interview. But before we talk about what you should do during the interview, any questions? All right. let's move on. So now we've talked about what you should do before the interview. We've talked about, research, practicing, understanding your elevator pitch, recording yourself. So now that you're in the room, dun, 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 what happens, right? So let's talk about that. So your goal once you're in the interview is to convey that you're a good fit for the position, a good fit for the team, as well as a good fit for the company. A lot of times, interviews with anything else, we see people fail because a lot of times because of fear. They're nervous, or they, trip over themselves, or they just don't quite hit the mark with what it is that, the interviewer was looking for. So if you kind of understand and accept that your number one goal here is to just show that you're a great candidate for the team, for that particular position, as well as the company, then, your job is done. And if they make a different choice, then you can still sleep good at night. That's fine. But that's the goal. The goal is to just highlight and show, the light that resides inside of you and why this person should give you a shot. And I'll also say it is a two-way street. I mean, you are assessing whether you want the position as well. So that's important. Now, so in those examples that I talked about, a lot of times we're coming back to that. So a lot of times interviews are, at least initially, behavioral. And what that means is that interviewers are asking you about experiences that you've had in the past. Conversely, on the other side, they could be technical. Technical interviews are more so related to kind of the technical skills that you have. So, can you code, or, how are you with Excel? How are you with data analysis, strategic thinking, things like that, where it'll be very kind of like in the weeds. Walk me through how you came up with this analysis. And that's more straightforward. But for our conversation, I want to focus on behavioral because that's kind of more soft skill and takes a little more kind of thinking power. So typically what happens is an interviewer will say, tell me about a time when. And it's always to assess kind of what did you do in this situation? Was it appropriate? Is it something that sheds light into who you are? Of course it does, right? Because you did it. It sheds light into your character. It sheds light into how you handle situations. Some of the more common ones I've listed here. So we always hear, on TV, you even see it. Interviewers are like, tell me about your strengths and tell me about your weaknesses. And I think lately in recent time, people have gotten away from like, oh, I don't have any weaknesses, or I'm good at everything. So you don't want to ever kind of stratify yourself so that you're at one end or the other. Strengths are great for you to say what you feel you actually are good at. And typically it's not what you think you're good at. It's what other people have complimented you on, right? Because I don't really consider myself very organized, but all my friends seem to think I'm organized. So I feel like that is a strength of mine if other people are saying it and I'm able to say, these are examples where, maybe I did bring organization to that situation, right? And conversely, with I like to say areas of improvement, not really weaknesses, but for your areas of improvement, there is no, perfect or wrong answer here. I like to frame it in, what is it that I genuinely want to improve upon? So something else that I'd like to improve upon is, for example, an answer I've used before is just being able to think about the bigger picture and connect the dots and what I'm doing to why it matters. And so that's something that it kind of is a little bit of a softball of an answer, but a way for me to expound on that is to say, I spend a lot of time focusing on my day-to-day tasks, but didn't take enough time taking a step back and thinking about the bigger picture. So that's something I'd like to do more, and maybe schedule 30 minutes a week to just really think about what I'm doing strategically and how I can add value. So that's kind of, you say what you want to improve and also what's your plan to improve it. That's the big part of for an answer like that. Not just, I'm always late. That's not really what you want to say. It's kind of, I could do better with managing my time, and I'm going to buy a planner and try that out, or an Apple Watch or whatever. I don't know what you kids are into these days, but something to help you manage your time. A planner, I guess, shows my age, but it's more important to kind of explain what it is and what you're going to do about it. Now, for some of these others, things like a time where you had a challenge or an obstacle and how you got through it, or tell me about a time where you displayed leadership, or a time where you dealt with conflict, or you dealt with ambiguity. Ambiguity is a big one because there are a lot of times where things are moving fast, or maybe even slow, right? You just don't know what to do next, or maybe you're not getting a lot of good direction. And so not many people don't deal well with ambiguity, and that's fine. But it is a question that comes up a lot in interviews, because what interviews are testing here is, do you take initiative? Are you proactive? Or do you just hit a wall and stop? Right. So this is the thing is, when managers are asking this question, it's more so, is this a person that I'm going to have to handhold through things? Or is this a person who's going to come to me with solutions and say, hey, I finished this project. I was thinking I could do these 3 things next, but wanted your input on priority. So when you think about the question about ambiguity, you want to convey that you're someone that can take that initiative and be proactive and have a story to back it up. There may be questions about just general professionalism, or how you've dealt with, someone that you didn't get along with, or that kind of also lends to conflict, or even creativity. Tell me about a time where you showed creativity, when you felt like you were being creative. And this could even come in a form of a role that you don't consider as very creative, right? But when it comes to problem solving, which is the next one, it does sometimes take a creative mind. So you want to be able to highlight that and show that. Or a time where you had to use strategy or be strategic. A time when you had to, tell us about your communication skills. And even your work ethic, that's a question that could come up. And I use all of these are all elements, skills, attributes that I've looked for when I was interviewing people. And the way that this ties back to those 3 to 5 examples that I mentioned is that you should have a few stories that touch on several of these. And a lot of times people get trapped into kind of using the same story. So you want to have a few in your arsenal that can hit on several different skills and several different layers of yourself. Now, that's not to say you can't reuse a story, because there could be some additional information that you can give or provide that highlights another element of you. But you want to have a few kind of in your back pocket, whether it's a super difficult team project that you worked on. What was your role? Were you the person that kind of galvanized everyone? Were you the person that just put your head down and did the work? Were you the person that tried to be most democratic and broker peace? That's something that you could talk about from a conflict perspective, but also from a problem solving perspective, and potentially, depending on what the project was about, a creative perspective. So you want to kind of have a few different stories that highlight, the many facets of you as an individual, so that when these questions come up, you can immediately say, oh, okay, well, I know this is the story I'm going to talk about when it comes to showing my work ethic. I stayed up until 2 a.m. working on this paper and I got an A on it. That's happy path. And I also don't want you to feel like every story has to have like a super happy ending. That it's okay to say that you struggled with something and you did your best, and the outcome was X and you were hoping for it to have a different outcome, but you learned. The important part there when conveying a story about difficulty is what you learned. So that's something that's really important as well, because it shows that you're an honest person. Not everyone has super positive experiences all the time, but you want to focus on your role in the situation and kind of what you learned. And I feel like I'm getting a little rambly, so I'll pause there. any questions, comments? Have any of you received any questions like this? Okay, I see some nods.
Question.
Yes.
So in the case when you've been an interviewer, what are some of the common mistakes that you've seen an interviewee do, and from the other ones that you've done so far?
Sure. So I think I touched on this a little bit, or I was planning to touch on it, but yes, thank you for the question. So the number one thing is people don't ask for the job. So they leave, they say, shake my hand, and don't ask any questions and just go on about their business. And I think it's really important to cap the conversation off at the end and say, I'm really interested in this role. You've, really helped me you've helped further my interests, would love to work for you, and just want to be clear that I do want the role. So, right, because I think you have to assume that a hiring manager is interviewing multiple people. And if you leave the room without having said that you want it, you're already if you're an even keel with someone else and that person actually showed that they wanted it, it's kind of an easy decision, right? So that's one big one, at least for me personally. It's probably not that big for other people, but I think it's just important to really show that you want it in your interest level. Another big example is that people don't sell themselves. So this is exactly kind of what this slide was helping us talk about, is that people will say, oh, I guess I've had a challenge, but I'm not sure. I can't really think of one right now. And so that's fine. But I think the better answer would be, oh, can I have a few seconds to get my thoughts together? And just really take a beat. It's better to take the 30 to 45 seconds you need to think about something than to say you don't have anything. Because when the rubber hits the road, what if you're in a position where you're in a meeting and you have to make a really quick decision, or you're asked to come up with an answer on the spot? You want to show that you have the intellectual horsepower to be able to do that. So when it comes to talking about yourself and you can't deliver on that, that's a red flag, right? So that's why it's really important to kind of think about those examples. And even me, like, I'm mid-career, I, don't plan to interview anytime soon, but I still have my examples, top of mind. So the selling of themselves and being unable to really convey that story, I think is another big one. And then the third one is just like inability to connect. So, the person just isn't listening, or they look bored in the interview, or you just feel like they kind of just don't want to be there. So that's a little different from not asking for the role. This is more so kind of body language and being open and interested during the conversation, asking about me, right? What brought you to this role? That's a great question if you have nothing else. People love to talk about themselves, right? So if there's no question, if you really literally have zero questions, tell me what brought you to this role? What do you like most about this company? What do you see? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Always, always, always fall back on asking the interviewer a question about themselves, because they'll love that. So those are like the top three. Anything else, I think, for the most part, you can recover. And even if you felt like you give a weak answer, you could say, oh, when you ask me about working on a team, I just thought of something else. Do you mind if I share that with you? So you could always I feel like maybe there are some things you can't recover from, but typically you have 30 minutes. So you can always even at the end, and say, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about the work that I did at my community center. Can I tell you about that for 30 seconds? And, usually people will oblige. Any other questions? Oh, I see a raised hand.
Hey, Edwina, it's me. How are you?
Hi.
Hi, I'm Antonio. I got a question for you. As you being the person who's conducting the interview, are there any questions that you've been asked before that really wowed you from a candidate?
Oh, the ones that I recall off the top of my head have been someone saying, I read this article about, the company doing this new thing. What can you tell me about that? Or what do you think about that? So I think so that's been one. People like reading current events and asking about it, like appropriate current events, not like scandalous current events. That's been good. Also, people who've done research on me. So I've been impressed when people say, oh, you went to community college and so did my mom, or, so I love to talk about that. Not saying that it has to be that community college thing, but clearly they looked at my LinkedIn, right? So that tells me that they took the extra step to kind of do the research. And then the third one is when someone has spoken to someone already. So, well, actually, I don't know if these are actually questions versus kind of people highlighting what they've done, but I guess they framed them in questions.
They're both good insight. I'll take it.
Right. So someone would be like, oh, I spoke to John, or I spoke to my friend who interned here last summer, or I spoke to someone else who worked here. I'm not saying that this is like a requirement. And then they would ask me something about the context of that conversation. So that again is kind of, I think the impressiveness comes when someone has used kind of like a tertiary medium to confirm their interest. So they've either researched the company and they're bringing that into our conversation. They've researched me and they're bringing that into our conversation. They've researched what they'll be doing and they're bringing that to the conversation. Those are all ways that, I've personally been impressed. I'm trying to rack my brain for like a more general question that has impressed me. No, probably more specific to the role. For example, one role I was hiring for was a coordinator role, which is more administrative in nature. And one person that was interviewing, who we ultimately hired, asked about kind of how do we manage our files? So like, where do you save them? Are they on the network drive? Do you have a SharePoint? And I was like, oh, we didn't even talk about that. Actually, yes, let's talk about how we manage our files. So I'll add a fourth one is, the person heard either a gap or a problem or a pain point or an opportunity, and they were able to highlight how they could solve it. And so that was another great one for sure.
I'm glad that you said that, because one of my strategies has always been trying to find out the role of the company's opportunities and then connect my strength as a solution in the interview. So I know before the pandemic, it was a little easier because you literally could attend conferences or networking events, or potentially if it were a store, walk into the store and observe. But how do you feel as an interviewer, if someone that you were going to be interviewing contacted you directly before to ask you what the opportunity is or what you were specifically looking for in that role to kind of then preset their interview?
So I don't know if there's any one approach for that. I think some hiring managers would love it. And I think some would feel like it's a little intrusive. So I think if you have information that directionally tells you it would be okay to contact the hiring manager, for example, the recruiter. If the recruiter says, okay, yeah, reach out to the hiring manager, set it up, or, find them on LinkedIn, fine. If you don't know, I think it's a little risky. But what I would suggest is in the interview, you could talk about it and say, what keeps you up at night? What was your biggest challenge last week? Or, what from a management perspective, is there anything you're struggling with? So I think you can ask them in the interview, and it would make way for a great conversation. Because it also shows that you care and you're digging deeper and it's not surface. But I will say, if you do want to reach out in advance, I may not necessarily suggest you lead with the, what issues are you having? But you could definitely say, I applied for this role. I believe it reports to you. Would love to, if there's time for a coffee chat or something more informal before the interview process begins, I would love that. Or if there's someone you can connect me to on your team before the interview process begins, that would be great. So I think that could be more of the neutral way to engage a hiring manager without knowing explicitly if they're open to it or not. And sometimes people are bound by process. That's another thing too, where you may not get an answer because their process is so constrained, where HR runs the process and they don't really, veer outside of that process. So, and you won't always know that. So I think if you kind of ask for something, a more informal touch point, either with themselves or someone on their team, that could be a great way to initiate conversation.
Cool. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for your questions. Anyone else? All right. And oh, sorry, time tracking. Oh, wow. You guys are just letting me ramble on and on. Okay, I'm gonna get through these quick. Okay, if you get nothing else from our conversation, how many people have heard of the STAR method? Okay, got a few hands. Okay, so STAR method stands for situation, task, action, result. So this is a framework for how you answer those behavioral questions that we just talked about. So when an interviewer says, tell me about a time when blank, you start with saying, okay, the situation was, I mean, you don't literally have to say the situation was, but you start with outlining what the situation was, maybe where you were working, what was your job title, things like that. Then you want to get to the task. So what was the expectation of you? So I was working as you know, a tutor, and the goal was to help increase the grades of my students. And the action, what I did there, I came up with unique study tools for each person. I used index cards. I used, you know, I found this app for them to download. And ultimately, as a result, 2 of my 3 students wound up with 3.5 GPAs. So you really want to kind of weave the story together by saying, what was the situation? What's the context that they need to understand? What was the expectation or the task that you were supposed to fulfill? And then action is really, that's the unique stamp you had on it, right? Because like say it was a team project, that's more of a task, but the action is like, what did I do in order to advance that result? And the result is what ultimately happened. And this is really important because it's a well-known, understood, researched framework for answering behavioral questions. And it also helps, well, like you've seen me be guilty of, it helps with rambling and meandering through your answer because you know, okay, situation, okay, this is what they need to know. Task, okay, what was I supposed to be doing? Action, okay, this is what I actually did. And then that was the end result. So it's a great tool to have in order to convey those answers during your interview, because you really want to appear sharp and you want to be organized in your thoughts and how you're articulating yourself. I will pause there really quick for any questions on STAR method. It's one of my favorites, so I feel bad if we had to rush through it a little bit, but I want to give you guys time for questions. Okay, so after the interview, luckily this is only one slide. So I touched on some of this with Antonio and Ashif's questions. But questions for the interviewer, we talked about that. So if all else fails, ask them about themselves or ask them what they think about something. What do you think about the future of this company? What do you think about, you know, this particular trend? What do you think about, I don't know, TikTok? You can ask them anything, I mean, obviously related to the role that you're discussing. Ask for the job, we've talked about that. And what we didn't talk about is send a thank you note. So back in my day, I used to mail handwritten thank you notes. But, you know, we had email then, but I just, you know, was a little extra back then, I guess. But so that's a great thing to do as well. Or you could just send an email. I think it goes a long way after the interview is done and you've had a time to digest the conversation for you to say, hey, you know, not hey, but hello. We had a great interview. I appreciate your insight. I appreciated what you shared with me about these things. Wanted to reiterate my interest and thank you for your time. So that's a great way to close the loop. And the important thing here is not really that you thank the person, it's that you're showing that you have follow through. Because if they hire you and they forward you an email and say, hey, can you take a look at this? Then they want to know you're the kind of person that's going to respond and say yes, and then respond again and say, hey, I took a look at this and these are my suggestions, or I took a look at this and yes, it's a problem, or no, it's not. So you want to show that you are a person that has follow through and commitment and are closing the loop on communication. And the way that you do that is by sending the thank you note and, you know, and also showing your appreciation. Okay, before we move on to, raise hands. Yes, Michelle.
Hi, can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I just wanted to ask if you can expand on the ask for the job portion of after the interview, because you already answered my question about the thank you note.
Okay.
Can you expand on that as to how we would ask for the job? I'm always baffled by this because it just sounds like I'm here for the interview. Of course, I want the job, you know.
Not necessarily, Michelle, but yes. So the thing is, I mean, just as I don't know if you heard this part, but I mentioned that, you know, we should all assume that most hiring managers are interviewing more than one person, right? They're interviewing more than you. And so the point here is that people, just because people show up for an interview doesn't really mean that they want the job. It could be because of obligation, or they don't want to look bad, or they don't want to burn a bridge. I mean, all fine. They want to, you know, be competitive and see what offer they get so they can leverage it. So I don't think you should assume all motivations are aligned with yours, right? I think, yes, between us, obviously from showing up, I want the role, but I think getting back to your actual question, asking for the job is, at the end of that interview, you say, thank you so much for your time. I really would appreciate the opportunity to come work for you or come work at this company. I could see myself growing here. I believe that I would add tremendous value to this role. And I look forward to hearing next steps. You know, that's how you ask for the job. It's not like, oh, I want this job. It's more of conveying your interest and conveying, you know, that you want the opportunity. And that maybe don't go so deep if you actually don't. I don't think you should do that. But if you do, I think my point here is just, if you really want the role, you should tell people you really want it. Because if they have a question in their mind about it, they're going to assume that you don't want it. Or so you don't want it as bad, maybe, as someone else who was clear about it.
So unless they already asked the question as to why you want the role, you would just like reiterate why you think you would be a good fit for the role and how you would benefit and how the company would benefit.
Yeah, I mean, someone could ask, you know, why do you want the role early on in the interview? And I think at the end, yes, you could take 15 seconds to reiterate. If they ask you at the end, obviously you don't need to repeat yourself. But yes, it's great. You know, as I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, I apply, you know, for this reason, and I think I could add a lot of value here, and I think I would benefit from working here and grow on a professional level. You know, that's like 10 seconds to say, but the person leaves, they're like, oh, she wants this. You know, that you're not leaving any doubt behind.
Right. All right. Thank you.
Sure. And Antonio, did you have another question? I think your hand's still up. Oh, okay. Any other questions before we get to networking?
Hi, I have a quick question. This is regarding when you're asked, where do you see yourself in 5 years or 2 years? How would you answer that if you're still trying to figure it out, but in the meantime are interested in the position?
Great question. Thank you for this, because I forgot to put this in there. Okay, so there are two options here. If you actually know the answer, then you can give it and say, in 5 years, I see myself as a senior manager, you know, running the department. I don't know, I made that up. Or if you don't know the answer, you say, in 5 years, I'm open and I'm still exploring, but in 5 years, I'd really like a role that is able to allow me to do X. X meaning it could be skills or, you know, some professional experience. So you could say, I'm still exploring, but in 5 years, I would really love to have a role that gives me exposure to clients and sales. I see that as a great, you know, next phase of my career. That's a perfectly fine answer. It doesn't have to be tied to a role. It doesn't have to be tied to a title. And I actually think that's a better way of answering the question, because it doesn't box you into someone saying, oh, this person wants my job, or this person doesn't want the job, or this person doesn't plan on being here in 5 years. I think if you're concerned about that, how it will be interpreted, then you can just add an extension of what the role currently is. Like, what do you naturally think the next step of this role that you're interviewing for will be? And then you can answer it in that way. And a third option actually could even be, you know, I'm still exploring and still growing and not quite sure what I want to do in 5 years, but I'm open to learning. But I do know I still want to be here at this company. So, you know, there are ways for you to commit to something without necessarily having a full-blown career plan. And I mean, also in present day, people switch jobs so much. So someone may ask you that, But I think just showing an openness for opportunities and showing that you've thought through what kind of skills you would like to gain and how you want your career to progress, those are the keys to that, answering that question. I don't think you need to say, I want to be at this level, with this number of direct reports. And, I don't think you don't need anything that super specific. Does that help?
Yes, it does, because I am, it's with interviews, it really sucks with me that I feel like they want a very specific answer, and that kind of can either, prevent getting the job. It's like, oh, they don't see you sticking with them, sort of like not having a long-term plan. But thank you so much for the answer.
Sure. And like, but you touched on it. And if now, obviously everything is steeped in if it's true. Like, I wouldn't suggest you say that you want to stay at the company if you know you don't. I think you just need to be a little creative about how you package that. But with someone that's concerned about that, all they want to hear is that you are open and committed. Because what if you get there and you don't like it? Like, or it's not for you, or you've changed your interest area. I don't think anyone can expect you to stay committed to something you say today without having all of the information at your disposal. So it's more around saying, I'm not going to leave in 6 months kind of thing, or showing that you are there for the journey and, open to it, as I mentioned. All right. Oh no, we're very short on time. I feel terrible. Any other questions? Or Ashif, I don't know if I can go a few minutes over. I don't know if we
can go about 5 minutes over.
Okay.
That's okay. Yeah. I know we're extended. We're very short on time, but
I did not realize it. I'm so sorry, everyone. Okay. I don't have that many slides for networking, so I'm going to try to rush through these and then we can talk for a couple minutes. Does that work? All right.
yeah.
All right, so networking, let's talk about that. So let's talk about kind of how you initiate contact. How do you really meet someone when it comes to a professional relationship? So we're not having these anymore, a lot of these because of COVID, but you can meet someone in person, at a networking event or a conference like Antonio mentioned, at the lunchroom, in the building. There's also what we call a warm intro. So if you haven't heard of that, this is when someone that or introduces you to someone else. So they can send an email and say, hey, Jane, I met John and he's great. I think you should grab a coffee with him. Warm intros are great when you don't know the person that you ultimately want to have a conversation with. And then lastly, there's cold calling. So cold calling is when you find someone on LinkedIn, or their email address or even their phone number, and you reach out without having a prior relationship. So it's definitely an order of kind of best way to meet people, to kind of, the highest level of interaction down to not, but I'll keep it going. So I have a love-hate relationship with the word networking, so I crossed it out and put relationship building. So the tips here is really to be purposeful and intentional across all of those ways that you may have met the person. So really what this means is understand why you want to talk to the person. You don't want to be a serial networker who's just collecting business cards. Well, people don't really have those anymore, but adding people on LinkedIn with no rhyme or reason, no real cause to your mission. You want to really think about, okay, what is it that I want to accomplish professionally? And who are some people that I feel that I should connect with in order to do that? The second thing is you want to really understand the value of a two-way relationship. Networking is not about kind of getting all these names of people that right? It's also about who knows you. So it's very different who versus who knows you, because who knows you, these are people that know your name, they know what school you go to, they know what your major is, and kind of what you want to do, right? And that comes by having a balanced relationship. When you're networking with someone, I think it's important to understand that although they may be further along in their career, or they may, be working in an area that you're interested in, you also bring value to the table, right? It could be an article. Hey, I just saw this article. It reminded me of you. Not sure if you saw it. It could be, hey, there's this event happening. I plan to attend. Thought you might be interested. So there are definitely ways that you can add value, even though it's still very early in your career. So don't forget that part. Number 3 is staying organized. Your calendar. I have an Excel sheet of all of my networking contacts. So it's a little, I guess I am kind of organized now that I think about it. So it has the person's name, it has where they worked, where I met them, the last time I spoke to them, whether it was email or by phone, any ancillary information, like if I know who their husband is or their wife or what school they went to. And I also have, what do I want to talk to them about next? And so that's, a way for me to stay organized. And even, who have they introduced me to or who I need to introduce them to? That's a big one. And you'll see as people in your life professionally churn, it's great to just keep a handle on, where people are moving, when they move careers and things like that. And it's a way that I stay really organized. And I think it's a great tip, a great tool to use for sure. And then 4, follow through. So we talked about this a little bit with the thank you notes in the interview. But the biggest faux pas with networking is wasting people's time. You don't want to do that. So if you say you're going to call, or you say you're going to show up, or you say you're going to be there, make sure you do it. People can forgive something coming up, a cancellation, but not, you ignoring it or like not showing up, or that's just not great. And you don't want to build a reputation on that. So I try to make it a point. I haven't been great with it in COVID, but usually people that, my top tier networking contacts, relationship contacts, I'll say, I try to chat with them once a quarter. Second tier is like twice a year. Third tier is like happy holidays, happy new year, kind of what's new in your life, right? So in thinking about that follow through, remaining consistent, that's really how you build relationships, because I can't tell you the number of times I've gone to networking events and spoken to people and students and other colleagues, and they're super excited to chat. And we chat once and I never hear from them again. And so it makes me feel a little used. So you don't want to be that person. Okay, so moving on. I just want to reiterate here and set your minds at ease that most people will help you. If you reach out to them and you are intentional, you're clear about who you are, why you're reaching out, how you found them or how you came to know about them, and what it is that you think you can offer them or what it is you need help with, most people will help you. I've cold emailed even the CEO of my company. I'm very much a no ego person. I feel like everyone puts their pants on, one leg at a time. And so I think having that sense of humanity in dealing with people and reaching out to them, they're receptive to it. I've never had anyone refuse to talk to me, So I think take out all of the angst of feeling like, oh, this person won't talk to me or they won't. If they answer, they great. And if they don't, also great. It's like there's always more people to talk to, but don't, feel like there's so much pressure on saying the right thing or doing the right thing. As long as you're professional and you're open and you're vulnerable and clear in your communication, most people will help you. Okay, so yes, ending on kind of the key with relationship building is understanding what's unique to you. What is it that you want people to remember you by? That's the mark you want to leave. When you reach out, you want to say, hey, I'm the student from Colin Powell, and we talked about politics and how you were a White House fellow, and I really am interested in the program. Would love to set up a chat. And by the way, I had a red shirt on at that event, right? You really want to kind of hone in on what is it that people will remember, what is it that's important to you for them to remember, and build a foundation and a relationship from that point. Okay, lastly, I'll end on this. This is something that has really stuck with me throughout my career. I was told this when I was, in your shoes. And it's really that any person that you've seen in our society or you've considered successful is because they took advantage of that critical intersection of opportunity and preparation. So being prepared is nothing if you don't have an opportunity to execute on it, right? And having an opportunity, but being ill-prepared is also nothing because it'll pass you by because you weren't ready. So it's almost like if you are always ready, you never have to get ready, right? So I just want to leave you with that kind of anecdote that you will be successful as long as you're always prepared and take advantage of the opportunities that come to you. And it's also kind of law of attraction. as you continue in your career, opportunities will come because you are prepared. So it's inevitable, right? Your success. So I definitely want to leave you with that kind of positive affirmation. Okay, 2 minutes of questions and conversation. I'm so sorry we went over. I was just going on and on.
No, you're okay. Unfortunately, I can't just
Okay.
because we can't hold everyone up for
Oh,
questions,
right.
but do you prefer that they go through me if they have questions and I'll forward them to you, or do you want me to, can we share your email? Whatever you prefer or you're comfortable.
Yeah, either's fine.
Either's fine.
Do you have my email, right?
Yeah, I do have your email.
Yes.
So,
Okay. Yeah, LinkedIn, email's fine.
okay, perfect. So to the folks here, I'll send out Edwina's email. So if you have any questions after this session, you can reach out to her on your own. Edwina, thank you so much. This was
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
all right. Thank you, everyone. Take care and have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Take care, everyone.